Master Sergeant Retired Jason Ambute in his home in Plant City, Florida. He's retired from the U.S. Air Force, and he was in Operation Desert Shield and Storm. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Lived there my whole life until December of 1979 when I joined the Air Force and went to basic training right after that.
All right, and what were you doing before the Air Force, like when you joined?
I did a few different jobs. I worked in a factory as a welder. I did some truck driving here and there, painted a few houses, did whatever I could to earn money at the time.
Yeah. And did you have any family influence on joining?
No, not really. I mean, I found out later on in life that I did have family that was in the military in World War II. But like I said, I didn't find that out until much later after I joined the military. But no, there was no immediate family influencing me to join. Basically, 1978, 79 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, unemployment was 13–14%. And even though I was working, I just wasn't happy, and so I wanted something new. I wanted a challenge. I was always a mechanic, and I always liked airplanes. So I decided to join the Air Force and become an aircraft mechanic.
All right. And what exactly did you do, like?
Well, I was basically what we call a general aircraft mechanic. In the Air Force, we call it a crew chief. Basically, I knew, I knew a lot about the entire jet. Okay, we had people in the Air Force who we called specialists. They were either like especially an electrician or specially hydraulics. Well, I had skills, not specialized skills, but I had skills covering the whole thing from hydraulics to engines to electrics. So, and I was basically, as the crew chief, I was in charge of my airplane. I was to make sure that what maintenance needed to be done got done on the airplane. So.
And what kind of training was required?
Well, first, after basic training, I went to what we call a technical school, and I went there for, I believe it was 4 weeks, if I remember right. That was in Texas, Sheppard Air Force Base, and that was just general introduction to working on airplanes. They had different airplanes there. They didn't give you any specialized training on the aircraft that you were going to go working on. That came after I got to my first duty assignment, which was Utah, and it was on the F-16, this airplane right here. And I was fortunate enough to be in the very first squadron with the very first F-16s. They were brand new at the time. So once I got there, then I went to another, I believe it was a 6-week class where we were taught specifically how to work on this airplane, from nose to tail, to wingtip to wingtip. So, and then after that, throughout the career, many different other courses. I became engine run qualified. So, in order to get up in the cockpit and start up the jet, we had to go to class for that and learn how to do that. And then, other classes, how to work on the engines, things like that. So, yeah, I had a whole bunch of, other, training periods to learn my trade throughout the years.
Yeah. And where exactly did you serve?
Let's see. Well, I'd already mentioned that I was at Sheppard Air Force Base. That's in Texas. I went to Hill Air Force Base, which is in Utah. Did 3.5 years there. Then I went to Germany and wound up spending 12.5 years there. Had a really good time over there, obviously. And then from Germany, I came back to the States and was at Cannon Air Force Base, New Mexico. Spent about a little over 2 years there, and then I went to Korea for a year, unaccompanied, meaning that my family had to stay there. I had to go there by myself for a year. And then I came back to the same base, because that's where my wife and my daughter was, and was there a short time, and then found out that my father here in Florida was gravely ill, and the Air Force gave me what they call a humanitarian assignment. So they transferred me from New Mexico to the base here in Tampa, Florida, so that I could be close to him and take care of him. So I did 4 years here, and then then a golden assignment came up back out in New Mexico, but this was in Albuquerque at Kirtland Air Force Base, and this was at the Operational Test and Evaluation Center. So at that time I was looking at, my career was winding down, and I was thinking about, well, what am I going to do afterwards? I was working on finishing my degree, and I figured the test and eval experience would line me up for a job on the outside. So took the assignment in Albuquerque, did 3 years there, retired, and then we moved back here to Plant City.
Awesome. And what was Korea like?
Korea was a trip. Okay. If I wasn't away from my girls, that was the only bad thing that I disliked about it. But as far as the unit right there, you see, everybody was all in the same boat. Nobody had their wives, nobody had their kids, so or husbands or whatever. So we were all together. We were all stuck together. But it just so happened that the people in our squadron, it was just the perfect mix. We all gelled together, we worked well together, we played well together, that's for sure, on the weekends. But it was a lot of hard work. Sure is a different country, and but no, Korea was not bad, not bad. At the time, that year went by slowly, but when you look back at it, it did go by fairly quick. But would I do it again? No. No.
Alright, and with Desert Storm, when were you first notified that you had to go in?
Well, actually, it started off with Desert Shield, okay, and it was August of 1990, and of course, I was in Germany at that time, and we had seen on the news when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and we were all kind of, thinking about, because we had seen stateside units start to deploy, and we were wondering, okay, well, when are we going to get the call to go? And a couple weeks went by, we still didn't get the call, and and it was rumored that, okay, well, in Germany we were there to protect NATO, okay, so they wouldn't take us from Germany and put us in the Middle East. Well, it was on Sunday, right around the 4th of September, which was my son's 10th birthday, got a phone call on a Sunday afternoon to report to base immediately. So, we rolled into base, well, masked up at a hangar, and we were all notified that we were going to be traveling to a classified location in the Middle East to go and spend the next 48 hours getting ready. So, there was a lot of things to do as far as like getting shots. There was a lot of people who had to get weapons qualified on that Monday, so they were running people through the mill getting them weapons qualified. Lots of other things, so it was a blur of activity, and then of course the job that I was working at that time was aircraft battle damage repair. I was in charge of the ABDR program for the base, so I had to make sure my equipment, and we had to deploy with all our specialized equipment, I had to make sure that was getting ready as well. So there wasn't much time to spend with the family because, like I said, I got notified on a Sunday afternoon. 48 hours later, on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, we were on an airplane flying. So it was that quick of a notice that, from notification to actual deploying. And they didn't tell us, like I said, it was a classified location. They didn't tell us where we were going, and we didn't know until we landed. And then of course, we couldn't call back and tell everybody where we were at. It was, supposed to be a secret. So. But yeah, that's the notification process, and from the time I got called to the time I went was roughly about 48 hours. So yeah, that was pretty quick.
Yeah. And what was your first day that you were deployed like when you actually arrived there?
Hot, really hot. I think if I remember right, it was about 115 degrees. And fortunately, well, I can tell you where I was at now. It was a little island a country called Bahrain, which is just off Saudi Arabia it's out in the Persian Gulf. And it was hot, but at least fortunately there, being in the Gulf, it was constantly windy. So instead of just, like a sauna room, it was a blast furnace. So you had the wind blowing hot air and dust and dirt. But, actually the breeze did, give you some relief. But I just remembered how you know, how hot it was, how dirty it was, and not having anything cold to drink. There was ice. Ice was more rare than diamonds. You know, it was, and is about as valuable. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's what I remember about first deploying. And then, you know, of course, we were living in tents. They didn't have enough tents for everybody, so we had what was supposed to be a 10-man tent. We had 17 in the tent, so you know, living quarters were pretty cramped.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't the best of conditions, but you know, over time, you know, of course, you know, the way Americans are, they're always going to do something to improve their you know, their environment, their living conditions, and it did get better eventually. But yeah, the first day was a shock.
Oh, yeah. And did you experience any like sandstorms?
Mm-hmm. Not as bad as what they did in Saudi Arabia, because being on the island, you know, you really didn't have, you know, the land mass where you do in Iraq and Iran or Afghanistan, where the storms can build up and generate a whole lot of sand. Ours in Bahrain were just, you know, basically if you had a big wind blow, you know, it wasn't that bad. Later on during the war, when the war was winding down and Saddam set fire to all the oil wells, we were getting a lot of the dark smoke actually getting down that way to us, you know. So, and you could see the black haze in the atmosphere. But no, sandstorms, no. In fact, speaking of storms, we got down there I think on the 6th or 7th of September, and we did not see a cloud in the sky basically until, it was shortly after the war kicked off. It was towards the you know, middle to end of January. But then we went into what their monsoon season, their rainy season.
Yeah.
And it was a few weeks of cold and rain and what have you, which just made things muddy and sloppy and not very pleasant. But okay.
How was keeping in touch with your family?
Well, back in 1990, 1991, we didn't have the computers, we didn't have the internet like we do now, we didn't have email. If it did exist, I wasn't aware of it, we didn't have it. You know, the basic form of communication was writing letters every day. In fact, that was, I'll tell you, you know, just like when you see these documentaries of, you know, what World War II, whatever, Korea, you know, the joy of everybody's day was mail call. Did I get mail? Everybody looked forward to it all day long. So mail was the primary means of communication. And of course there were telephones, and but you had to buy these cards, you know, 200 units, 400 units, whatever, and I can't remember the cost of it. So, but with, you know, several thousand, 4,000, 5,000 troops, and only X amount of phones available, so, you know, you would strategically time your phone calls, i.e. you'd get up at 2 in the morning, you know, and go, you know, that was generally the time when the phones would be free. And then eventually, you know, they freed up more phones and what have you, so eventually it did get better. But at first, you know, it was letter writing and telephones, and those were, you know, kind of hard to come by.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple of times too, the little store on base would run out of phone cards because people were buying them up. So if anybody caught wind of, hey, they got phone cards in today, people were making a beeline over to buy as many phone cards as they could, you know, so they could have them. All right. Okay.
And how was like being separated from your family? Like,
Well, it stinks. You know? It definitely stinks, and well, especially too. I mean, I had been deployed before, but that was generally okay. I knew when I was going, and I knew when I was coming back. You know, the thing with Shield and Storm is that there was no end date. You know, and it could have been, you know, as short as a couple of months, or it could have been like, say, the guys in World War II who went off to war in 1942 and didn't come home until 1945. So, you know, that thought was going around, you know, in your mind and other people's minds. It's like, well, you know, when are we going to go home? That's the biggest thing. And it's like, all right, let's get in here. Well, they got us here. Let's get the job done, and let's go home. And And, even when, the war was done fairly quickly, I'm not sure if you remember or not, but the war would only lasted like 45 days. And by the middle of March, we were mopping up and, just basically it was business as usual. And then the question was up, okay, well, when are we going to get to go home now? But, we were told, just don't plan on it. When you get notified, be ready to move again. And sure enough, and that's when it came. I mean, I was in at work, just working along, and all of a sudden, the chief came up, and, and I knew my name was on towards the top of the list of folks to go home, all right? But, we had no indication, no clue, but by God, I was ready. It wouldn't have taken me, but 10 minutes to throw all my gear into the bag and roll out of there. And sure enough, I was at work. Remember being out on the jet. Chief came up, Ambute, get out of here. You're gone. You're going home. You're on that 141. You're going to have to be over at the terminal in an hour. Plenty of time, So got back to the tent, threw all my gear in the bag, and I was ready to roll. And in fact, I think it was on if I remember right, it was close to Easter. I don't know if it was Easter Sunday or not, but it was in April when I went back home. But yep. But yeah, being away from the family stunk. It really did.
Yeah. And what were the living conditions like everyday life, eating and stuff?
Well, as I mentioned, living in a tent, sleeping on a cot, not exactly very comfortable. And then of course you're sharing a tent with, 10, 12 other bubbas in there, and not very quiet. Let's see, eating, they did have a chow hall that we would go to, and of course, one chow hall, several thousand troops, you're always waiting in line, waiting in line. And you're just praying they don't run out of food by the time you get up there, but we never ran into that. The food was really bad at first. They had foreign nationals coming in and doing the cooking. A lot of it, they were like from India, Pakistan, whatever. Nothing against them, but they do a lot of their cooking curry-based. So it was like curry this, curry that, day in and day out. Finally, we had complained enough, and they actually did start deploying, American military cooks to run the chow halls, And at first it was, like I said, pretty rustic, no ice to speak of, hardly. We were eating a lot of MREs, during the day. In fact, if you didn't feel like standing in line, you'd grab yourself an MRE and just sit there in your tent and eat your MRE. We didn't get a lot of time to break away to they did have a field kitchen set up to where, it was close to the flight line where we could go over there, but yeah, the conditions there, the food was good, but you were constantly, battling all the flies that were coming in, trying to fly off with your food. So it was pretty, the flies were terrible, pretty nasty to eat over there, so, but, that was it. They did allow us, I think it was like 1 day off in 10 or something like that, 1 day off in 8, and they actually had a bus service set up to where you could go down to the city of Manama, which is the capital of Bahrain. And so we get that day off. You could go down there. There was a club that was run by a British petroleum company that opened their doors to us. We could go in there, watch movies. We could actually get a couple of beers, eat. Go to a restaurant, actually eat restaurant food. And let's see. That's pretty much that was living. Eventually, we did get a movie tent where we lived in Tent City, so we could watch, VHS tapes projected up on a screen. We got to do that. As far as latrine facilities, very, very rustic at first. I don't want to get into the details, but they were pretty grody. Eventually, we did get field latrines put in. Those conditions improved somewhat, but those were pretty rustic at first. Yeah, and we did have showers, okay? And fortunately, you know, the Air Force, you know, they take care of us, and they actually had heaters for the showers. But, and that came in handy when the rainy season hit, when it started getting January, February, and it cooled off. I mean, you think, you know, 45, 50 degrees, you know, somebody from Michigan, oh, that ain't cold at all. But when you've been used to 115, 110 for 4 months, 40 degrees is really cold, you know. So, you know, we did have showers. They had it to where, because we had to run a desalination plant, we were taking water off the Persian Gulf, which is salt water. So water, you know, we were urged, you know, to conserve water, you know, and the showers are those types that if you when you hit the button, it runs for a couple of seconds, and then, you know, it automatically stops, and you have to hit it again. So, you know, people weren't constantly leaving the water on. So, yeah, you know, that was passable. I mean, at least we got a, you know, good shower in at the end of a hot day. Let's see, what else with living conditions? I think that's pretty much it. I mean, they did put they ran a little BX, a base exchange, in a tent, so you could, you know, get the little amenities. But really, with all the care packages that we were getting from people stateside, I mean, you know, we had this one big bin, you know, and well, bins, and we just set them up. And I mean, if you needed a toothbrush, all right, boom, there's a bin, and it's just stock full of toothbrushes. If you needed toothpaste, there was a bin with toothpaste in it, all right. You could, you know, pretty much the little deodorant, shampoo, you know, it was, you know, all the people from the States were great sending us care packages and everything. So, but, you know, with no time off, what are you going to buy, you know?
Yeah.
And TV at the time, you know, I remember we got that was the Super Bowl between the Giants and the Bills. We heard it on the radio. I guess there were a select few who did have TV. The officers, I don't know, but we didn't have it. We listened to it on the radio.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, your forms of communication back in 1990 and now 20 years later are like night and day. Night and day.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, we didn't have the internet, didn't have Skype, didn't have, you know, all this good stuff. Not at all. So,
Yeah.
but that's pretty much it for living conditions I can think of.
Alright, and I see you have all these different awards and stuff. Are there any that really stand out to you that you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, all of them are, you know, important. I just figured I'd put them up since I had nowhere else to put them. I didn't want to put them all in the attic. But no, there's a couple. I mean, I've got, you know, getting my degree before I retired, you know, was pretty important to me. It sure lined me up for, you know, the work that I'm doing now in retirement. But no, I mean, right, you know, one of the things is right up here on the wall is, you know, you asked if, you know, somebody, you know, if I, you know, and this goes back, I guess I totally brain farted this, but, you know, I did have family influence. You know, my Uncle Jerry did serve in the Air Force from 58 to 62. I guess, you know, influences in the military as I was growing up and cognizant of it, you know. He had served in the Air Force and separated, you know, when I was 2 years old. And before he separated, he bought me that little Air Force uniform. And I remember when I was a little kid wearing it all the time, you know, and you know, afterwards, you know, I didn't even give it a thought, but, you know, and I would remember it from time to time, especially after I joined the Air Force. I was like, well, I wonder what happened to that, you know, that little uniform I had. Well, I knew the pants were destroyed, but I had no idea that the shirt was in a cabinet somewhere or in a drawer. And when I retired in 2007, you know, my Uncle Jerry and Dee came out for my retirement ceremony. During the course of the ceremony, down towards the end, you know, I thought things were winding down, and then all of a sudden, you know, my Uncle Jerry gets up and, you know, says that he's got something to give me. And, you know, I was like, whoa, you know, I didn't know that was in the script. And I said, no, this is a surprise for you. And he got up there. He wasn't much for words. He didn't say much, you know, but he got up there and he's, you know, just explained that in 1962, before he got out, that he gave me that uniform, and it says on there, it says, your destiny. you know, and presented by Uncle Jerry. And he said, you know, I wish I could quote him, but, you know, it's something to the effect, but, you know, about the, you know, how little that jacket was, and then, you know, what I've grown into now as an adult and a retiring chief. And, yeah, there probably wasn't too many dry eyes in the audience there, you know, so. But yeah, that's very special to me, and it always will be. Yeah, I was amazed he's still at it, you know. And who'd have thunk it, you know, back in the day that, you know, I mean, running around a little 2-3-year-old, you know, in his Air Force uniform, that, you know, one day that I would grow up and join the Air Force. But, you know, again, to be honest, when I joined the Air Force, I didn't think about that. Not at all. So, but that's, you know, like I said, I mean, a lot of these in here, each one has its own meaning and its own significance. And, you know, I don't know if it's in the camera right here, but from when I was in Korea, that was a present from the squadron at my going away. And I guess, you know, one thing that's important too is the picture of my son when he was in the Navy. Oh yeah, and painting of B-17s my dad did. And there is one other thing that I'd like to show you too, but I've got that hanging out on the living room wall. So. Well, yeah, and lastly, Sammy, one of the things that's significant that pretty much, as you can see, the size of it, don't have room in the for this in the other room. But you know, my wife wanted this out here in the living room, pretty much to where, you know, when you walk into the front door, that everybody gets a look at it when they first come in. And you know, this is what you know, by tradition in the military, when somebody retires from service, they present them a shadow box. Okay, and the shadow box is a basic, you know, shadow of their history. You know, what they've done, different ranks. They put different things inside of it. One of the things that normally goes in is usually, you know, the ribbons here, the medals that they've earned. There's always an American flag that goes with it. You know, that normally that should go with it. And usually you have all the ranks, you know, that you hold. And what I did is that the guy who made this for me used the little metal ranks that we used to wear on our collars, all right? And so we used that rather than the big stripes, because then it'd be a huge box. And then they also put on there all the different duty stations or locations where I served. The one thing that I thought was really touching was that this flag right here was flown in a jet on a combat mission over Iraq. And it was also, then they mailed it back to the States, and then I had another friend who worked on the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds, and they flew it in the #1 Thunderbird over the Air Force Academy on graduation day in 2007. So I thought that was really cool, you know, and I appreciated the effort that the guys went to do that for me. But yeah, this is one of my pride possessions as well. So.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions?
What is one thing that you took away from the war and everything?
Never take your family for granted. Treasure every moment you have with them. And that war is a terrible waste. And not only, you know, money and time, but it's, you know, it's just a waste of human life. But it's unfortunate. Sometimes you have to do it. It has to be done. And if you're going to do it, I like how we did it in Desert Shield and Storm. We went in, we did the job, we kicked their asses, and got out of Dodge. So, you know, that's what I can take away from war.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
all I had was the ether. Now this is primitive, and yet
Yeah.
we did the best that we could.
Mhm.
So we used ether as the anesthesia.
Okay.
I'd take care of him, send him home the same day,
Mhm.
and hope that nothing happened.
Okay.
As long as you didn't get too much ether yourself, why,
Yeah.
it was okay, huh?
There's one other little story I
Alright.
might add, because I hope that I made the correct diagnosis. I was called over to Marion Shades, where Ish and Arlene live now. He had a colt born, a little foal,
Mhm.
and it couldn't get up on its feet.
Okay.
And I examined it, and I thought that the fetlock, the rear fetlock was fractured.
Mm.
No x-ray or anything, but it's just
Mhm.
from palpation. Well, in school, they said the gun is the easiest way to eliminate those cases.
Oh.
But I never felt that way about the animals. My attitude was, do what you can. Maybe eventually you'll do something that works.
Okay.
So I said to Opal Shade, I said, do you have an old coat hanger? You know, the old wire coat hangers? Yeah. She brought it out to me, and I molded it to the back of the horse's foot and put a little peg on it, and I went up to the blacksmith. That's the days of, the early days, the blacksmith was still here in town.
Yes, mm-hmm, we had it right across the
Ed-
Roses.
Ed Clark.
Yeah.
And I said, Ed, would you please make me a piece of strap iron about 1 inch wide and mold it as this wire? Then we attached a couple of pieces of leather to it, leather belts.
Mm-hmm.
And I went out to Marion's,